Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing well. We have the Battle of Raphia, 217 BCE, the biggest battle in Hellenistic history. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do with that phrase. The biggest battle in Hellenistic history. First off, I need to freshen up. Is what is Hellenistic and what is that time frame of history? So if you know that, yeah, cut my research short after the fact. Let me know. But essentially, we got Egypt and we got the Seleucids, or we got the Ptolemaic kingdom. We have the Seleucid kingdom. Forget who is the leader of the Ptolemaic kingdom, but we obviously have Antiochus as the Seleucid. So let's jump right in. Hit that like button. Let's see what we got. Biggest battle ever in Hellenistic history.
Over 100.
Oh yeah, of course, Ptolemy. We have Ptolemy the Fourth. That makes sense. Okay.
140,000 warriors stood arrayed in battle order on the desert fields of Raphia. The wealth of Ptolemaic Egypt against the vastness of the Seleucid Empire, two superpowers of the Hellenic world. The young kings addressed their respective armies, offering both words of encouragement as well as reminders of past glories and heroic deeds of their ancestors. Interpreters and unit commanders rode up and down the lines, repeating the words of their sovereign so that all could hear. The greatest praises were heaped upon the men of the central phalanxes, with whom both rulers had rested their strongest hope for victory. By all intents and purposes, both sides were determined to settle the Syrian question once and for all.
And it's crazy to think that, of course, these are the remnants of the Alexander Empire, the Macedonian Empire, and you have similar formations, similar military units, similar aim, but you have different culture, different environment that's kind of meshing the two, plus different leadership that's going to be implemented with strategy and or tactics here. So that's really the difference maker, is the strategy and the tactics here, because you have I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to have very similar technology, you're going to have very similar units, you're going to have very similar abilities. However, it's going to differ just slightly here and there because of the different area, and it's also going to be more on the commander itself. Is the commander going to help push this to the edge, or is this going to result in a defeat? Pass this ad.
The year is 217 BC. It has been over a century since the death of Alexander the Great. In the aftermath of his untimely passing, Alexander's fledgling empire had fractured into a number of successor kingdoms, each led by the various political factions that had made up the late monarch's court. At the head of these newly founded kingdoms were Alexander's former generals, friends, and family, collectively referred to as the Diadochi. Vying for domination of the Hellenic world, they regularly squabbled amongst each other in a series of conflicts known as the Wars of the Diadochi, which lasted for nearly half a century. Three dominant powers would ultimately emerge in the aftermath of the war. In the west, the Kingdom of Macedon was ruled by the Antigonid dynasty. To the south, the Ptolemaic kingdom reigned in Egypt. And finally, to the east lay the Seleucid Empire, its vast holdings stretching from Anatolia to the Indus River.
Obviously, the Seleucid Empire is the greatest of the three in terms of size and strength. Macedon holding on to what they had. You can also see they're kind of encompassing like Athens and other cities there. Egypt's Egypt, right? They have the Levant. In this instance, they have the Levant too. So that's where you're going to have tension. And it looks like Egypt also technically has parts of Anatolia, Cyprus, and more. Parthia is interesting, thinking how they're migrating from where they're at to where they will be. Of course, you have like a lot of Arabs, different cultures that are just going throughout. this area. Um, Armenia. That's one thing I want to continuously say to and bring up. Armenia's got to be like top five oldest countries ever, like nation states ever. I mean, Rome obviously doesn't exist, so you can't really equate that to Italy. You can, but I wouldn't. Egypt really doesn't exist, but I wonder how much Armenia still exists from where it was 1,000 years ago. I know that was a tangent. Let's jump into it.
Despite its size and seemingly dominant position among the three Hellenic powers, the Seleucid Empire had long been in a state of decline since the death of its first ruler, Seleucus I, in 281 BC. Over the next half-century, the successive Seleucid monarchs that followed struggled to maintain a firm grip on the empire's eastern territories. Their attention occupied by repeated wars with the Ptolemies of Egypt over ownership of the Coele-Syria region. Seleucid authority slowly began to erode in its distant territories as a result, with many of the empire's eastern provinces breaking off to form their own independent governments.
Dang.
To make matters worse, through a combination of Celtic incursions and a successful rebellion led by the governor of Asia Minor, resulted in the empire losing a large portion of its northernmost territories.
And Pergamon. Is that after? No, because Greece didn't change. Because that's a similar border right there after Greece falls.
The loss of the lucrative coastal cities in Anatolia was a significant blow to the Seleucid economy in particular, and greatly weakened the empire's position. In 222 BC, Antiochus III, at the age of 18, assumed the throne of the Seleucid Empire as its sixth ruler. Having inherited a truly disorganized state, the young and energetic monarch maneuvered to stabilize his position and revitalize his floundering nation. Among Antiochus's most pressing issues were a series of fresh revolts in the east, an encroaching Pergamon in Asia Minor, and a century-long territorial dispute with the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt over the Syrian region.
I mean, you just got three crazy things happening at once. You got Pergamon, which eventually will align the Rome, and we know what happens there. But then the Ptolemaic Kingdom at the bottom, I mean, that's just a whole, I mean, they're the breadbasket of the world right now, and it will continue to be. It's just, in the east, it's just so far away from Antioch. It's just it's just so difficult. It's interesting though. You got Antiochus obviously, but Seleucia. Did the capital move, or is the capital Antioch? I'm not sure.
Issuing a flurry of orders, Antiochus sent his cousin Archias to deal with Pergamon, dispatched two of his generals to put down the revolt in the east, while the monarch himself led a campaign against the Ptolemies in Egypt. The young ruler would get off to a rocky start, however, as his generals were defeated in the east, while Antiochus himself was completely repulsed in Syria. Fortunately, Seleucid prestige did not suffer a complete collapse, however, as Archias proved successful in his endeavors in Asia Minor, managing to drive the Pergamene army back to its former borders.
Yes, look how small they are comparatively.
In 221, Antiochus was determined to reassert Seleucid authority over the eastern provinces once and for all. Personally leading a force himself, the young monarch would go on to successfully suppress 3 revolts in the region.
Dang.
In seemingly typical Seleucid fashion, however, while Antiochus was away, Archias, who had been in command of Asia Minor, chose this opportune moment to launch a rebellion of his own, assuming the title of king in Asia Minor.
Bro he said, I'm tired of this. I'm going to make my own.
However,
For a world.
Zacchaeus' power was not established enough to threaten other nearby Seleucid territories.
Is he just gonna get away with like just breaking off from the Seleucid Empire?
Antiochus did not consider him to be an immediate threat, and thus upon his return from the east, opted to renew attempts to secure Syria instead.
That's crazy. That is crazy that Zacchaeus just pulled the biggest heist in the world right there. Oh man. That was a calculated decision. He's gonna live there for a little bit, I guess.
The resulting Seleucid campaign of 219 would prove to be highly successful, owing in part to the defection of the Ptolemaic governor of Coele-Syria, Theodotus, who had become unpopular with the Egyptian court. Coincidentally, Theodotus was the same commander who had repulsed Antiochus a few years earlier in 222. After decisively defeating a Ptolemaic force at Berytus in 218, Antiochus would go on to capture the town of Philadelphia, before marching deeper into the Levant, where he found himself bogged down, besieging Damascus and Sidon. In Alexandria, the fourth pharaoh of Ptolemaic Egypt, Ptolemy IV Philopator, was slow to react to the invasion of his territories, neglecting to make any meaningful military preparations throughout 219.
Big oof.
Ptolemy was also a fairly young ruler, having ascended to the throne just 2 years earlier in 221, at the age of 22.
Both young.
Spurred by the counsel of his ministers, the young pharaoh spent the majority of 218 frantically gathering his army and hiring mercenaries, all the while sending emissaries to Antiochus under the pretense of negotiating peace to buy additional time. Fortunately for Ptolemy, Antiochus agreed to a 4-month truce. It seems that the Seleucid monarch believed the war was already all but won, and was now more concerned with Achaeus in Asia Minor, and as such sought to winter in his home territories so as to discourage his cousin from launching any potential incursions. With his preparations complete by the middling months of 217, Ptolemy IV marched his army from Alexandria into the Levant to confront Antiochus and the Seleucid host, seeking to settle the Syrian question once and for all. The pharaoh brought with him a force of around 75,000, of which 5,000 were cavalry, in addition to 73 elephants. Meanwhile, Antiochus had approximately 68,000 troops under his command, 6,000 of which were cavalry and 102 elephants.
So, pretty even. A little bit of an edge to Ptolemy, but very slight.
In accordance with Hellenic military doctrine of the time, both commanders understood that the number of phalangites fielded by either side would prove to be especially crucial in the upcoming struggle. Here, the Ptolemaic army held the advantage in numbers, with around 45,000 phalangites, while the Seleucids had some 30,000. It is important to note, however, that 10,000 of the Seleucid phalangites were the Argyraspides, also known as the elite Silver Shields. They were the premier infantry unit of the Seleucid Empire, with a long and revered tradition of military service dating back to Alexander the Great himself.
I think we saw some of these Silver Shield units when we were looking at the Macedonian Wars. Or was it the Battle of Magnesia?
Additionally, the elephants Antiochus brought to the field were from India, which are believed to have been much larger and stronger than Ptolemy's African elephants.
The North African elephants.
The two armies would meet near the small town of Raphia, where sources suggest that Antiochus purposefully ordered his army to make camp just 1 kilometer away from that of Ptolemy's. For 5 days, the opposing forces skirmished with one another, regularly clashing over water places and whilst foraging for food. It was during this time that Theodotus, the former Egyptian governor of Coele-Syria, who had defected to the Seleucids, would attempt an act of extreme daring. After the skirmishing had concluded on one of the days, and just before dawn, Theodotus entered the Ptolemaic camp, accompanied by 2 others.
Okay.
As Ptolemy's army included those from all across the Hellenic world, the covert party's dress and appearance were nothing out of the ordinary. And
wait, he's infiltrated, like he's under disguise. Okay.
as such, they managed to slip past the camp's guards without attracting any suspicion.
Okay, what's the plan?
From his time spent serving under Ptolemy, Theodotus had become familiar with the pharaoh's tastes and habits. He also made note of the location of the royal tent during the day's previous skirmishes, which had strayed relatively close to the Egyptian camp. Making his way past the pharaoh's attendants, Theodotus entered the royal tent. To his surprise, however, the pharaoh was not present.
That's awkward.
And a would-be assassin instead struck down the Egyptian ruler's unfortunate physician, Andreas. Afterwards, Theodotus managed to safely return to the Seleucid camp.
How did he get it? Bro's a true assassin.
His plot having only been discovered just as he made his exit.
That's insane.
After 5 days of skirmishing, Ptolemy was determined to do battle and gave the order for his army to assemble. Upon seeing this, Antiochus hastened to do the same. Both armies formed up with their respective phalanxes in the center. To the immediate left of the Egyptian phalanx was a unit of Libyan peltasts, followed by the pharaoh's own royal guard further down the line. On the Egyptian far left, Ptolemy placed a portion of his cavalry, closely supported by a contingent of Cretans. To the immediate right of the Egyptian center were units of Greek mercenaries, followed by various contingents of allied troops consisting mostly of Gauls and Thracians. Beyond these units, Ptolemy placed the remainder of his cavalry. Of the 73 elephants available to the Egyptian forces, 40 were placed on the left flank, with Ptolemy himself positioned among them, and 33 on the right.
Okay.
And
remember, obviously, Antiochus has a little bit of an edge on cavalry and elephants. 1,000 more cavalry, about 50 more elephants.
Antiochus, meanwhile, positioned himself on the Seleucid right, directly opposite Ptolemy, with some 4,000 cavalry, split into 2 units of around 2,000 each. Next to the cavalry, the Seleucid center right was manned by a contingent of Cretans, followed by units of Greek mercenaries, bolstered...
Hey, if you're a Greek mercenary, you just fight anybody, I guess. Like, it's work, right? So, like, you fight your own people.
...by an additional 2,000 men from the Seleucid phalanx. To the left of the Seleucid center were various units of light infantry and javelin men gathered from throughout the empire's vast Persian and Arabian territories, with a detachment of approximately 2,000 cavalry rounding out the extreme left flank. Finally, around 60 elephants were placed in front of the Seleucid right, with the remaining 42 being positioned ahead of the left flank.
Okay, like 30 elephant difference, not 50.
Truly befitting a clash between superpowers of the Hellenic world, over 140,000 warriors across both sides now stood arrayed in battle order on the desert fields of Raphia.
Yeah,
the wealth of Ptolemaic Egypt against the vastness of the Seleucid Empire. The 2 young kings addressed their respective armies, offering both words of encouragement as well as reminders of past glories and heroic deeds of their ancestors. Interpreters and unit commanders rode up and down the lines, repeating the words of their sovereign so that all could hear. The greatest praises were heaped upon the men of the central phalanxes, with whom both rulers had rested their strongest hope for victory. By all intents and purposes, both sides were determined to settle the Syrian question once and for all.
All right, there we go.
The battle began with both sides ordering their elephants to charge. Here, Polybius states that Ptolemy's smaller African elephants could neither bear the smell, sound, nor sight of their Seleucid Indian counterparts, and as such, were at a significant disadvantage, with many refusing to engage, and instead turning back and running amok upon the friendly lines of Libyan peltasts. Only a small portion of Ptolemy's elephants managed to engage the Seleucids, though they were quickly overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Antiochus, at the head of his cavalry, wheeled around the elephants in front of him and charged the Egyptian horsemen. Simultaneously, the Seleucid Greek mercenaries launched their own vicious assault upon the now disorganized lines of the Libyan peltasts.
Okay. It's a great start for the Seleucid so far. This side.
Under such pressure, the Ptolemaic left wing slowly began to give way, before eventually being routed entirely. On the other side of the battlefield, the Ptolemaic forces fared better, however. Recognizing that his smaller elephants would likely be too afraid to even approach those of the Seleucids, the commander of the Egyptian right wing...
So you see how Ptolemy, though, I know we're distracted over there on the right, but you see how Ptolemy repositioned himself to the middle.
Recognizing that his smaller elephants would likely be too afraid to even approach those of the Seleucids, the commander of the Egyptian right wing instead led his forces in a flanking maneuver. Bypassing the charging elephant contingents entirely, the Egyptian horsemen threw themselves upon the flank of the Seleucid cavalry.
Here comes the battle. In
coordination with their commander, the Ptolemaic Greek mercenaries also moved to engage the lightly armored javelin men opposite them.
I mean, in this type of battle, everyone's just waiting because they have kind of like their man, quote unquote, like across from them. They have like a certain task to defend the people right across from them. So all this stuff happening to the left and right, that's for them to defend, for the others to defend. So instead of, it's just so crazy, you know, nowadays, you know, you would never have this, but back then, very pitched, very disciplined, very much assorted to where you would fight the people across from you unless some other people engage you.
These assaults succeeded in driving back the Seleucid left, with both sides essentially trading victories on either flanks. Antiochus, however, had chosen to pursue the routing Ptolemaic cavalry that had opposed him, believing the day to have already been won.
I mean, the phalangites are just chilling.
Ptolemy, meanwhile, after having been pushed back, had moved to take command of his phalanx in the center. Revealing himself before both armies, the pharaoh ordered his men to charge. Here, the fight between the two phalanxes was chaotic and bloody, and after some time the outnumbered Seleucid center was forced to give ground.
Wow.
Units across the line began to break and flee, and soon only the elite silver shield pikemen remained to hold the line. They too would eventually break under the overwhelming pressure, however, and with their defeat, the Seleucid center ceased to exist.
And it's insane, you know, just how it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And this is the most cliche thing ever, but it's true. I mean, look here, you had such a abysmal left side attack and or defense. It wasn't even really even an attack. But Ptolemy kind of like repositioned himself, repositioned his people, his phalanx, and then they charged. But not to mention, this whole victory would not work without what's going on the right, which is that flanking maneuver around the elephants to hit them hard.
Antiochus had not realized the critical situation that he was in, still under the belief that his army had achieved similar success across the entire front.
Yeah, where is he?
It was only when one of his older officers pointed out the cloud of dust raised by the phalanxes was moving towards their camp that he finally understood what was happening.
Here they go.
The Seleucid monarch desperately galloped back towards the battlefield in the hopes of aiding his center, arriving only to find that the entirety of his line had all but collapsed and in full retreat. With no other option, Antiochus retired to Raphia with his remaining forces, while Ptolemy retired to his own camp.
Wow.
The next morning, Antiochus withdrew with what remained of his army to Gaza, and after negotiating a ceasefire to collect the dead, abandoned the region of Syria Coele entirely.
Dang.
The Seleucid losses are estimated to have been around 10,000 infantry and 300 cavalry, with another 4,000 taken prisoner.
I thought it was much worse than that, actually.
The Ptolemaic losses are estimated at around 1,500 infantry and 700 cavalry, with the majority of their elephants either killed or captured.
Oh.
The battle at Raphia was one of the largest the Hellenic world had ever seen. In what many historians assume to be due to his youthful inexperience, had the Seleucid monarch instead immediately moved to support his center phalanx with his elite royal cavalry, rather than merely assume his victory was all but assured, the battle could likely have ended very differently.
And I mean, that's just the difficult thing about, is it a rout? Is it a feign retreat? Like, how do you finish them off and win because you've diminished numbers, or do you double down on moving inch by inch and then revert troops? It's just such a difficult thing to do.
It seems that the Seleucid command had further failed to recognize how heavily outnumbered their center phalanx was in comparison to that of the Ptolemies, though it is possible they may have believed that the elite unit of silver shields would have made up for any disparity in numbers. Regardless, given that the military doctrine of the time heavily relied upon the strength of an army's phalanx, it appears that in addition to his relative inexperience, Antiochus may have also been overconfident due to his previous successes earlier in the campaign. It's said that Antiochus took comfort in the fact that he had managed to achieve a local victory with the troops he led personally on the battlefield, and instead chalked his overall defeat up to a lack of spirit and courage amongst the rest of his army.
Of course, that's gotta be it. Gotta be it.
Upon his return home, alarmed that Ptolemy might seek to press his advantage, Antiochus quickly sent a delegation to negotiate official peace terms. As Ptolemy was busy reconsolidating his power in the recently rebellious and now freshly reconquered region, the two rivals agreed to a 1-year truce. With such
1 year later.
matters taken care of for the time being, Antiochus shifted his focus to Asia Minor, making preparations and steeling himself for a confrontation with his treacherous cousin, Antiochus. Despite the setback, the young Seleucid monarch did not find himself discouraged in the slightest, however, and would continue to work tirelessly
Of course not, because he didn't blame himself. He blamed the courage of the others.
towards revitalizing his empire, eventually becoming known to history
As Antiochus the Great.
as Antiochus III the Great. Support the channel by joining
Wow. Interesting stuff here, though. Ptolemy had the better force when it comes to numbers. Quality? Yeah. But Antiochus, like he said, like, if he was to rap, things could be different. Or, what was that guy's name? Early on. Talking early on. Hold on. Yeah, this guy right here, Theodotus. what would be different? What would happen if Ptolemy was chilling in his camp or in his tent, and Theodotus assassinates him instead of the physician? Well, this might not have even happened. You know, they might have fled. They might have garrisoned and been in a weird siege defense. They might have, you know, who knows what would have happened. It's really hypothetical at that point, right? So things went right though for Ptolemy for it to be a win. And yeah, another fun video of ancient warfare. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you guys so much. Until next time, peace out. Bye.